Okay, all right. Let's get back to the the diaspora homeland problematic. We know that in Israel, Obama's approval ratings, if you will, hover between 4 to 8%. They're extraordinarily low. We know that in the United States, 77 to 78% of American Jews voted for Barack Obama. His approval ratings are around 65%. Do the numbers indicate some sort of divide in world Jewry, or at least between the two huge chunks of world Jewry in the United States and Israel? And is that perhaps one place where J Street can play a useful role?
I think it indicates there's a divide here. And I suspect that divide is likely to grow as time goes by. But I think ultimately the left, the American Jewish left, failed to comprehend what it would mean for Barack Obama to be so unpopular in Israel. They wanted a more even-handed approach. They thought that if Obama was tough with Israel, that would sort of give the United States credibility in these negotiations and make things easier. It turns out that the effect was to drive the Israeli public toward Netanyahu and to really handicap his domestic opposition, the Israeli left. And so now you have a situation where Bibi's not really under a lot of pressure. Bibi can sort of thumb his nose at the White House without fear of political repercussions at home, as there traditionally is for any Israeli prime minister who causes a breach in the U.S.-Israel relationship, because everyone in Israel blames that breach on Obama.
Do American Jews sitting in the comfort of the United States have a right to criticize Israel, and ought Israel even listen to American Jews?
Look, they have a right, obviously, to criticize Israel. Should the Israelis listen? I mean, that's a question for the Israelis. I think the core point on this, and what really concerns American Jews, the genuine mainstream of American Jews, is that the rest of the world criticizes Israel endlessly, mercilessly. The United Nations criticizes Israel. The Europeans criticize Israel. The Arab League criticizes Israel. What the world does not need is another group to criticize Israel. I mean, yes, of course, there's legitimate criticism to be made, but it's being made. We don't need another organization, to my mind.
So maybe the Jewish critical genius should be tamped down a little bit when it comes to Israel.
Well, AIPAC's position has always been that this criticism should be behind closed doors.
In-house, right.
Which, you know, I think as far as it goes, that probably works most of the time. But of course, there are situations where I've gotten very upset and been very public in my criticism of Israel. Situations they've sold arms to the Chinese, particularly unmanned surveillance aircraft. They've sort of helped the Chinese with their development of this stuff, but this is really troublesome. You can't have an ally who gets massive amounts of U.S. military aid, sharing technologies with a near-peer competitor of the United States.
And you identify yourself as a Jewish American,
yeah.
I take it?
So
what's the proper position there?
In that case, I was furious, and I wrote about it and said, you know, geez, this is outrageous. And the Bush administration cut military contacts with the Israelis for a very brief time over this until the issue was resolved. So, you know, obviously there is a time when you want to be very public and vocal in your criticism of Israel. I tend to think that those issues do not have to do with the Israeli-Palestine conflict, though.
All right, so we've looked at J Street's position on the Gaza war. Another problematic position they took was on the Goldstone report, where they refused to either condemn or embrace the findings of the report. What would you make of that?
I would say that this was part of this realignment that we saw in the weeks leading up to the conference. As J Street's legitimacy and its credibility came increasingly under attack and into question, J Street felt compelled to they couldn't quite hold the positions they wanted to hold. So in the case of Goldstone, there were two real issues like this. There was Goldstone and sanctions on Iran.
Right.
On both those issues, prior to the conference, J Street had put out statements that did not condemn the Goldstone report. They had also put out statements condemning sanctions on Iran. They were opposed to sanctions on Iran. As this drumbeat got louder in the run-up to the conference, and as their problems started to multiply, they tacked right on both these issues. On Goldstone, Jeremy Ben-Ami, the J Street director, went to Jeffrey Goldberg and said, we refuse to embrace that report. What does that mean? It's not quite clear. So I asked Haydar Suskind, who's their policy director, I said, you refuse to embrace the report, and yet you have not condemned the report. And he told me there's a lot of space between embrace and condemn, right. Which is no position at all. But it's good. At least they came off these sort of ludicrous left-wing positions that are totally at odds with the American Jewish community. They can't quite bring themselves to join the moderate mainstream of the American Jewish community on those issues because they risk alienating their core support.
But they say they're not at odds with the American Jewish community. Their view is dialogue is being suppressed in this country. And what American Jews really feel is something that simply cannot be publicly spoken because of a stranglehold on discourse in this country, and here they clearly blame AIPAC. Now, you clearly don't believe there's any warrant for that.
No, I think that's look, they're here, they're saying whatever they want. You can say whatever you want in this country. But at the end of the day, American Jews and every major Jewish organization in Israel, including very left-wing Jewish organizations in Israel, everyone has condemned this Goldstone report. The administration has condemned it, Congress has condemned it. And yet they refuse to condemn it.
If the narrative looking forward 10 years, if we were sitting in these very chairs in Riggs Library in Georgetown University 10 years from now, and the narrative was there was this group called J Street, and they started off and their message was all over the place, and it tended to tack sometimes to the radical left, but they looked at their constituency, they looked at their interests, and they purged the radical left, and they moved on to represent a left-of-center American Jewish viewpoint that was clearly within the Zionist consensus. Wouldn't that be a happy story?
I don't think that's likely to happen.
But would it be a happy story?
Sure, but it would be a redundant organization. I think at the end of the day, AIPAC gets a pretty bad rap. Most of the people at AIPAC are Democrats, okay? This is not a right-wing organization, contrary to a lot of the attacks on it. People there are politically left of center, but on Israel, they are not. On Israel, they are for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, regardless of politics. So I think what happens here is actually the American Jewish community, yes, it's a left-wing community for the most part. It's a liberal community. But on this issue, not so much. Okay. On this issue, it's not about traditional left-right politics. On this issue, they're just for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship.
All right, we've been speaking with Michael Goldfarb of the Weekly Standard. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us today.
Thank you for having me.